Oh yes, it's time for the floor realization of floor of general works. But how will this work, considering previous events? Well, that's what this law breakdown is for. Angela went into the light to release it, intending to do so for a full week this time. This was seen from the outside as a colossal, towering tree of light, which burst into view, into bloom, or however you want to call it, for the second time. Flooding the city of Grey with its warmth, the light that would penetrate the hearts of the city folk, allowing them to finally face the emotions that they forgot existed. The seeds wouldn't bear fruit immediately. They wouldn't sprout at the same time. They'd each poke through the soil, shrouding the city in a wave of change that everyone would notice in time, to give them at least a chance to face their true feelings and express them. To stop lying to themselves. Angela understood that she wouldn't be there to see it herself, finally understanding why the others wished that they could be there to see the fruits of their labours. But during this, like last time, there was another that wanted to interrupt her mid-release, asking if she was truly fine with letting it all go. This intruder within the light was, well, it at least appeared to be her, as she appeared before she redesigned herself after the Seed of Light's first activation. Angela didn't know what to make of this. The false Angela told her to relax. The light was being spread just fine. She just wanted to have a brief chat with Angela. Angela didn't have anything to say to this intruder. The false Angela told her that it'd only take a moment. Time doesn't matter much there, implying that however long it takes to get the message across, it's unlikely to take a full week. Angela asked what she had to tell her at that point. The false Angela acted as if she was Angela's inner self, that she actually wanted to let go of her one wish that she's held for 1,000,000 years, the wish meant for herself. False Angela seeked to claim the freedom for which she's yearned, the path to this outcome finally being opened. Angela told her that she made her first choice out of her own free will, to release the light for a full week this time. False Angela went on to say that the emotions festering deep inside her, to have them blossom again. Together, it's not impossible to do. She's been watching Angela. She's been closer to her than any other. What did she mean by that? At this point, the surroundings changed, and the false Angela looked more blooded. She was wielding the wrist cutter EGO, telling Angela to sharpen all of her vexation, anger, and sadness, to bring forth a cutting edge from her true feelings in the light. Okay, gender-bent Darth Hideous. Angela asked if the false Angela was suggesting that she thwart the plan again. After thinking about it, she decided to refuse, not wanting to repeat her mistake twice. She intended to spread the light with what she's learned according to the original plan. The false Angela considered that pitiful, that she suppressed her emotions and sunk deep, deciding to show her the past and remind her once more, believing that she's having trouble facing it straight, that she'll soon realize what her mind truly desires and accepts it, showing it to her in a way that should be familiar to her. Okay, false Angela, don't tell her what she's going to think, as if by naming her opinion in advance, she'll be unable to alter it. Besides, Angela wasn't going to change her mind. Now, this is much like the first time, except the false Angela is much more powerful than Bloodbath alone. And at first, Angela is alone with her own unique key page and combat pages. She's armed with combat pages based on Today's Shy Look, Child of the Galaxy, Burrowing Heaven, Happy Teddy Bear, and The Funeral of the Dead Butterflies. Now, it's unclear if she's wielding the one book, or even if the power of it is derived from the light itself, or even tied to it. And after some moves are made by both, the assistant librarians of the floor of General Works appears to assist her. The wrist cutter, or rather the EGO that the false Angela wields, relies on her enemies being staggered. She has superior blocking capability and is quite resistant to slashing, something that Angela and her backup will need to take into account. They also need to get rid of the depression that they're given when hit by specific attacks, as it not only makes them weaker to being staggered, but it can also slow them down and weaken their own attacks. The false Angela had some mixed feelings during this. At the start, she felt that she collected everyone's wishes, drowning in the deep sorrow, not wanting anyone to look away, to expose the skin to spill out the wishes within, asking if she can withstand the grief, feeling the weight of others' burdens, wanting to sink into despair. But as the false Angela is nearing defeat, she realizes that she is honestly collecting everyone's wishes, but is afraid of being confident in her own decisions, asking if it was justified to deprive others of what they want, feeling how others are desperate to protect something, along with the wrath of loss that comes after. It wouldn't reverse what happened, questioning how just her actions were, wanting to move forward, not wanting to get in their way. After her defeat, we see a bath filled with blood-contaminated water, as in the bath which made the blood bath abnormality, along with the files of all that would become the Sephiroths. A voice said that she wanted to live. This desire was stronger than anything. A desire realized too late when regret finally ran a shudder through her body. Ah, this was her, wasn't it? At this point, she was also armed with the power of EGO, specifically that of the Scorched Girl, the fourth match flame, which in this case was called the Will to Stand Up Straight, and the EGO of the Forsaken Murderer, Regrets. which in this case was called the rationale to maintain discretion. The will to stand up straight being a reference to Malkuth wanting to wait for things to get better with some hope found at the end of her meltdown. She said this much to Ayin at that time. The rationale to maintain discretion was a reference to Yesud having hope, knowing that Ayin, or X as he was known then, would embrace his past, knowing that it will be difficult at first. And this is even though he's probably one of the more logical beings in existence outside of the universes depicted in Star Trek. The false Angela wielded the aspiration EGO, that of the heart of aspiration. This is much like last time, but with more lungs of craving, as there are more librarians. Each has a specific craving: faith, pain, effort, and weight. The faith craving provides strength and endurance equal to half of the hankering that the false Angela has. The pain craving gives a good amount of hankering when one of the other lungs of craving dies. The effort craving gives a steady supply of hankering to the false Angela upon hitting one of the librarians or Angela. And the weight craving gives a good amount of hankering every scene that it's still there. Although defeating 2 of the lungs of craving will provide the fervent beats buff, giving a wide variety of enhancements to the survivors, which also heals them and makes it harder for them to be staggered, while also filling up the stagger resistance. The false Angela will hit anyone hard after all that. Well, all of the lungs of craving are dead, and then make 4 more appear. Angela and her librarians would need to repeat this battle until this phase was defeated, and then they could finish her off. At the start of this phase of the battle, the false Angela spoke of waking up carrying the memories of one that she'd never seen. Oh yes, her. Although she felt her faintly, resembling one who was human, struggling, wanting to get closer to humanity, wanting him to be more willing to look at her. Yeah, this is likely referring to Ayin. Asking why she looks like her, to resemble her, as it shouldn't matter how she looked if he was going to treat her like a coffee machine, only feeling the beats as the end drew near, faintly but with certainty. And as this phase was nearing the end, she asked why he wouldn't look at her, why was she denied, feeling pressured by these concerns, noting that impatience results in missing many things while chasing misplaced desires. The memories of that person don't mean she is that same person. She sees the meaning of her own existence, perceiving herself wholly, knowing where she has to go, when before she didn't know where to go. After that second defeat, we see a brunette woman with her hair done in a ponytail. A bright light in the middle of a crowd within a dull city. She told Angela that she's a human like any other, where she thought that sacrificing herself for the sake of everyone would be the perfect ending. But this wasn't the case. Yeah, that would be too convenient for a grimdark world, wouldn't it? At this point, Angela gained access to the Red Eyes EGO, that of the Spider Bud, which is called the Hope to Be a Better Person, and the Da Capo EGO, that of the Silent Orchestra, which is called the Fearlessness to Keep on Living. The Hope to Be a Better Person was a reference to Hode wanting to continue to try to be better, if it helps someone, even if she's hated for it. After realizing that she was previously doing so for herself rather than for others. The fearlessness to keep on living is a reference to Neshak after trying to kill himself with an enkephalin overdose. Ian as X saved him from that during his meltdown. After that, he saw hope and a reason to continue living, even though he felt resentment towards Ian from day one, and not just for saving him. The false Angela was wielding the marionette EGO, that of Pinocchio, who was dressed in the 19th century style and looked more like a gender-bent Pinocchio than Angelica did. She was accompanied by 4 other Pinocchios, each with their own properties, although they can still copy the decks of their enemies. One uses the Song of Lies, which copies the first Assistant Librarian's deck, and randomizes what light is needed for all attacks that cost 3 light or less. The one that uses the song in backward copies the second Librarian's deck and copies the status effects of the ones that they copy decks from. The one using the song for all copies the third Assistant Librarian's deck and makes all of them stronger and more durable, as long as it's alive. The one with the Song of Curiosity copies the 4th Assistant Librarian's deck and shuffles the decks of all librarians drawing 3 pages each scene. Which means they need to use what they have while that one's alive. And while the false Angela copies Angela's deck, she also destroys the Pinocchios. Well, a Pinocchio to fully restore both HP and stagger. So it's a good idea to prioritize the Pinocchios over her when possible. That's something that Angela and the assistant librarians realized during that battle. The false Angela, wielding Pinocchio's EGO, asked, what more could she do? Where she believes obedience would make everything work out, believing that the outcome she yearned for would be reached, ignoring the negative feedback, obeying the script, even though she wanted to escape, asking what she would do after the script was completed, as no one taught her, not knowing what to do unless someone else told her. Yeah. Believing that everything would be fine after blind obedience. That never works out well, does it? As defeat was near, she realized that she's made it that far. She'd follow a path even if she didn't have a concrete plan. She desired to become human. She would no longer allow others to make her decisions for her. She would choose her own actions, as this was what being human was about, even if the burden and sorrow was heavy. But she would bear it and might be happier next time. After the false Angela was defeated the third time, we see Ian with his back turned to what was left of Carmen, which was her brain and nervous system in a tank, which appeared to be facing his direction. Well, I say facing, as looking doesn't really apply, as she didn't have eyes at that point. Then this voice mentioned that there was no one in that world who could sincerely decide to sacrifice themselves for the sake of others, believing that humans can only love themselves. Well, if that's the case, how would we explain Ian? He was willing to go through repeated cycles of death and restoration, just to complete what Carmen started. She meant so much to him that he decided not to listen to Benjamin and live in a nest for the rest of his life, as life without Carmen didn't appear to have any meaning. It was at this point that the false Angela wielded the Frost Splinter EGO, that of the Snow Queen. Now, there's not much to say about this, as the battle is largely the same. It follows the same basic rules as the last time the Snow Queen was fought, except the false Angela is much stronger. This was when Angela gained access to Gold Rush, the EGO of the King of Greed, which was called the expectation for the meaning of existence. The EGO of Nosferatu, first, called the courage to protect, and the EGO of Ozma, faded memories, called those who are faithful and trustworthy. Now, the expectation for the meaning of existence is a reference to the female Tippereth believing that there's a reason for every sacrifice made, and that everything would be fine eventually. This was after her meltdown, and it was also considering what happened to the male Tippereth. Yeah. The courage to protect was a reference to what Gebura had when she was Kali, when she protected those that she could during the attack of the outskirts lab by Garion, Arbiter of the Head, and all those times before she was under the employ of Elcor. Those who are faithful and trustworthy, now that's a reference to Chesed realizing what he's lost and what he's regained. His faith and trust in those deserving of it, even if he's unsure if he'll be able to face his fears. But he knows he's done running from them. While wielding this EGO, the false Angela didn't believe that she had a place to belong. So she made one for herself. She had a desire to live, her motivation to secure that place, but with none remaining at her side that she knew of. Not believing that any cared about her, feeling cold, seeing only one thing to do, staying on the throne forever to keep it from others. a similar mentality to what happened at the end of Angela's Pyrrhic victory ending. As this part of the battle was nearing the end, she admitted that it had been quite lonely. She saw that there were no seats reserved for her. Wanting to live despite not being forgiven, wanting to know how to live a human life, seeing as she suffered much, asking if her struggle was meaningless, knowing that some chose to stay until the end, not caring about their sentiments either way. Then we see Angela in her feathery black dress, bound by red eyes, tormented by Letitia, Dream of a Black Swan, and the magical girls, as in King of Greed, Knight of Despair, Queen of Hatred, and Servant of Wrath. Those of them that had a mini kaiju form were already in it. The voice went on to say that she whispered into people the essence of life so that they would cherish their own emotions and focus on them only, so that the fluctuating shape of the mind can be exposed to the world. So, Angela was simply a pawn in the cause of the distortion. It was the source of this voice that was the true cause of it. Then the false Angela shifted to the remorse EGO, that of the silent girl, who was one of the first abnormalities ever made by Elcor. Subject number O-01-0-T. A TEF level abnormality. But that's deceiving, much as the Plague Doctor is Zayn level, one of the weakest, at least until 12 employees visit it and it turns into an Aleph level white knight. She was one of the unreleased abnormalities. As for how she worked, those that entered her containment units find that she's silent and largely harmless, although she did have a weapon hidden behind her. She made no attempt to attack them, but if they have guilt or fear, likely if they run out of SP or panic while working with her, or on her rather, she revealed a hammer and nail and decided to hammer that nail into them, which either kills them with the violence of it or by their minds being broken beyond recovery, as the crack in their mind grows too wide and it shatters completely. Now, this was not done with malicious intent. It was done with the intent to help relieve those that have guilt of it. Yeah, she wanted to relieve them of their guilt by breaking their minds. A case of more harm done than good. She didn't know the difference between guilt and accountability. Having a black and white mentality that's ill-fitting in that world, isn't it? At this point, Angela gained access to the Twilight EGO, that of the Apocalypse Bird, which was called the Eye Facing the Fear, Breaking the Cycle, and the EGO of the One Sin and Hundred of Good Deeds, Penitence, called the Eye Embracing the Past, Building the Future. Now, the Eye Facing the Fear, Breaking the Cycle is a reference to Bainar, when she stopped being a hindrance to Aeon during the Seed of Light construction. The Eye Embracing the Past, Building the Future is likely a reference to Hokma, who decided not to hinder Aeon, his old friend, and move forward, no longer running from the past or letting it hold either of them back. As for the false Angela, she's armed with a hammer and nail, and she is accompanied by hammers and nails, held by large arms, which turn into residual desires and whispering instincts later on. The hammer can raise the cost of attacks, while the nail can lower them, both on hits, or rather on hitting one of the librarians or Angela. This is how it worked when there were hammers and nails. But when becoming residual desires and whispering instincts, the desires are much stronger attackers, and the instincts gain power by the amount of guilt someone has. Guilt also reduces the damage taken by the false Angela. She is also unable to be harmed at the start, as in when she is accompanied by hammers and nails, but once they become residual desires and whispering instincts, she will go on the attack. She's capable of causing instant death to those that have guilt with one of her attacks. But even after she's defeated, even after she's the main focus of the onslaught of the General Works team and Angela, she will destroy all the librarians. But Angela, wielding the power of 9 EGO during that battle, she would be spared destruction. She then used the knowing EGO to purify the false Angela and reveal her true form. While wielding this EGO, the false Angela was silent at times, but she remembered a person with a warm heart, like the Aeon, but she couldn't feel it herself, feeling self-pity for holding on to painful memories, seeing a cracked mind as easily shattered by the lightest tap. It'd be nicer to be honest. While not saying what others push onto her, to pursue what she's been longing for, to release her emotions, to acquire freedom. And as the battle progressed, she understood that the scars of the mind will never mend, not even if she has vengeance against Aeon. It's why she had to stop this, to stop the repeating of the cycle. Fear and vexation wouldn't stop her from facing the chains of the past made of anxiety, as that's a part of her. She should embrace that, along with what she's done so far, wanting to end what they were doing as a true human should. After purifying the false Angela, she was revealed to be Carmen, one of the founders of the most recent version of Elcor, the one that Aeon wanted to finish the work that she started, the one that Angela was created to resemble, both in body and mind. But she deviated greatly from Carmen's side of the templates. Their paths would diverge from that point onwards. She'd go her way, and hoped that Angela would stay on hers. Angela asked if she wouldn't stop what she is doing. Carmen wouldn't stop until the city folk learned to look at their true selves and love themselves for who they are. Angela knew that this wouldn't be the same between them. That as long as she's part of that light, she'll do all that she could to stop her. Yeah. Carmen is Miss Sun, the voice that created the distortion. So by sparing Angela, Roland was gaining vengeance on the one that was ultimately responsible for killing Angelica. I have this theory regarding Ian's actions towards Angela, but I'll save that for the last lore video in this series, as it might be considered a heavy spoiler at this point. But it's clear that she was manipulating Argalia, and possibly others, such as Angela. Yeah, Adam was right. This was what Carmen wanted. She'd clearly lost it if she was the architect of the distortion. Although, after all that time as a brain and a nervous system in a tank, on top of the trauma that caused her to kill herself in the first place, and make the bloodbath abnormality, who would keep their sanity after all that? She's clearly not the same person that she was before all that trauma. Yeah. The realization of the flaw of general works was a counselling session between mother and daughter. Quite a dysfunctional family Angela has, hasn't she? Outside the library, the light soared ever upward ceaselessly. No dark days this time. Unlike last time, the hope that every person in the city would be able to move ahead without being swayed by more self-destructive influences wouldn't die before the release was complete. All those who fell in the library would wake up and find themselves where they belonged. Meanwhile, inside the library, within the lights, during the rest of its release, Angela heard something. A voice was heard, and this voice spoke words. These words were, "I'm sorry, and good job." This was the voice of Ian. Took you long enough to give her the recognition that she desired from you? Why wait all this time to say that? Well, anyway, that's all her loose ends tied up. The last page turned to... Well, this was just one front in this conflict. There was another. But that can wait. That's for the next video. Let's look at the comparison between the abnormalities and their individuals before we move on to that. The abnormalities on the floor of general works were individually significant to Carmen and Angela. The bloodbath was obviously significant to Carmen, as she killed herself by slitting her wrists in a bathtub due to the death of Enoch, pushing her over the edge, which was also what created this abnormality. The Heart of Aspiration is a reference to Carmen's aspiration to change the city for the better through the seed of light, likely before she lost her mind, which for a time, after her suicide and before the seed of light was activated, was the only thing she had left at that point. Pinocchio was clearly significant to Angela, as she wanted to become a human and wanted a better pass for human by learning from them, although not fully understanding how toxic some behaviours can be. The Snow Queen is a reference to Carmen's body being put in a cryocoffin, and then both being the source of cogito as the brain and nervous system in the tank to make the seed of light construction possible, and the rest of her body, or more specifically her hide, being used to create Angela, while her brain scan was used to make her mind. Or at least part of it. It also shows Angela's loneliness, emotional coldness, and the forced distance from others due to Ian's motivations, or indeed manipulations. The silent girl represents the guilt and remorse that both Carmen and Angela felt due to what they each did. Even though Angela tried to distance herself from that, and ultimately failed. This also represented both Angela and Ian, as both had to fight different iterations of themselves. With Ian, he faced off against the bitter Abram, the broken Abel, the psychotic Adam, and then himself. Angela faced off against Carmen, who was in the form of Angela's past self, wielding different EGOs. Both used what they learned from the Separas, or patron librarians, depending on which you're talking about, to not give in to what their demons were saying to them. The others didn't stand still during this. Oh no. They had their own battles to fight. I'll be going over that next. Until next time. Hail the rabbit!